All right, guys, we're starting early. Usually go at 11. We're going to go at 10:30, which is right now. And we got a hard stop of this meeting at 11:30, so 1 hour. And you guys have heard a couple times before. Brad has been with us. Just really quickly, him and I came up through the same firm, DEITG. It's two different names, same company. He came in a couple years after me, and he was he was there a lot longer than or he was there after me as well. But I would say you were probably the 50th guy hired at that point. What year were you hired, Brad?
Um, Maybe 50th, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe a little. I was
04?
No, I think of 2003.
Were you one of the first guys in the garage?
Yes.
They opened the garage as they got bigger. The office expanded, and we called the room in the back. But some of these guys ended up being just ridiculously good traders. Not all of them, but some of them would surpass, some of the original guys there, because I think that, to me, the best trader is a guy that manages his risk. But if let's say two guys have similar stats, similar risk management, whatever, and they don't risk a lot, they make a lot, all those components and ratios are good. But the one guy trades bigger, well, then that guy's better. Doesn't make the guy who trades smaller, bad. He's still great. If you are able to do it and do it with size and your risk is in control, to me, that's, those are the top, and you work your way down from there. I was never a huge trader or small. I was always in the middle, and I was comfortable with that. And it kind of segues me into what Brad was starting to talk about with his process and how you can't force certain kind of trading strategies onto people. But Brad, thanks for coming.
Sure.
And also he has a podcast that some of you guys listen to. I'll pop in a link to that, because you could kind of register, and every time he does a new one, you guys will get notified. How often do you do a podcast?
I try to do them when I'm inspired to say something, or I feel like something happens in my trading life that I could share with other people. So sometimes I'll go a few weeks and I won't do one, and sometimes I'll do 4 of them in a day. They're just real short, usually no more than 10 minutes, sometimes 2 or 3 minutes. I think I got over
Cool.
30 of them, 120 of them on there now.
Well, you keep a good pace, and you also keep them short and sweet, so it's not like.
Yeah, I don't want to ramble. And
No, right, exactly.
It's just kind of, this is what happened, and this is what I think about it.
All right, so getting started, you were talking about before I introduced you, you were talking. Go ahead and kind of repeat what you were saying when someone gets into this business and how they get educated. Sometimes the right and sometimes the wrong way.
Yes. So first, a real quick thing on the size that you just mentioned about how some traders are bigger and some are smaller, and you want to be able to do it with size and manage your risk. The one thing I would say about that is a lot of times the magic zone in there is that you are trading medium. I've always made the most money on a medium amount of size for myself. When I traded really big, I found myself having trouble getting out because I would freeze, because it's like you have so much invested in that big trade that you can't really. It's like an opinion that you hold really strongly, or some argument that you've been fighting with someone about for months, and you just don't want to give in. And the size is very similar to that. And if you're too small, it's just kind of like you don't care, and you're just getting nickel and dime to death. So it's that medium zone, and then the ability to get bigger when you really like something, and then be really small when you're not trading well. So it's like you're not always big or always small, but you can be really big. You or also can be really small. And a lot of times you're in that medium zone, and you have like different waves of that for you. I think that's a really good place to be, because I've seen the guys who are always trading big, when they struggle, it's really ugly, because then you're trading really big and you need to be able to cut that back. So if you can drop your ego out of it, it's really useful if you can learn to do that. Back to the main point here though, on the process. One of the things that, like, if I had to have one tagline for the podcast and my whole life, not only trading, but just my life, it would be something about, if you can't make it your own, there's no point in doing it. You can't copy someone else. It's really something that has to be fitted to your personality and your skill set. And everyone wants to be told, this is the way to trade, or this is the breakout to buy, or how to buy a pullback, and all these things, or some strategy for using earnings to make money. And all those things could work. And there's people in each one of those groups who make a lot of money, and people who fail also, more people who fail, obviously. But the big thing that I believe so strongly in, and that's why I always focus on this, is it's not about what trade you did or what trade someone else who's making money did. It's about how can you figure out where you're strong and then start making good trades in that area. So you have to line yourself up with where you're naturally good. So I've always been someone who's curious, who wants to find out about new technology, new products. I'm always buying new things like that, testing it out. In the market, I'm interested in, when correlations break down, whenever things don't act the way they're supposed to, I'm always magnetized to that. In terms of finding like value areas or really deep pullbacks and reading 10 Qs and 8Ks in the stock market, I do a little bit of that stuff, but it's just not as interesting to me. So I'm always competing with people who have that drive and that passion to do it, and I'm never going to be as good as them. So what trades I do are less important than fitting into the area that I like, and then working from best practices and ways to cut losses and magnify like that zone, like my core circle of competence. And I think it can be really hard to figure out what is that for me? Because if you're a new trader, you're like, well, I don't make any money right now, so I don't know what my zone of competence is. And someone who you think, oh, if you're doing this for 10 years, it's really easy because you've survived this long, you must know, well, I've been doing this for, I think it's 15, 16 years now. And I'm making this trip from moving from event-based. So first of all, I used to trade for 8 or 10 years. It was just day trading all day, every day in the futures, scalping 20 to 50 trades a day. And then it moved into more 8 to 10 trades a day, mostly focusing on events. And then it moved into trading for 5 days a month just on events. And now it's kind of a couple days a month just on events in the futures, and very focused on that stuff on those days. Big retail sales report, CPI, employment, ECB, Fed report, all that stuff. And the other side though is now I'm going into the stock market and I'm looking at how can I take what I used to do and get it to work in the stock market. So I try to isolate those event type things. I'm in a group right now with guys who look at earnings winners, and I'm seeing how that can fit into my strategy. So it's almost like I'm starting over. I'm not starting over in terms of understanding the psychology and the risk management and the emotional side of it, which is really the big thing. But in terms of knowing my process in the stock market, it's not that different than someone who's just starting with futures, because I haven't done that before. And you think, oh, it's the same. Well, kind of, but it's like you're in track and field and you run the 200 and now you want to run the 800 or the 1600. It's track and field still, but it's different. So on the process then, the things I've noticed that really work well for me are to have some kind of rules of engagement or some kind of trigger that says when this happens, then I may do this or that. So when we've talked about this before on some other podcasts, but when you go into a retail sales or an employment, you can get an idea of what the market's expecting, what they're pricing in, and you can map out ahead of time scenarios that might get you interested in trading, and you can put down your levels and be as prepared as possible. And what you'll notice usually always happens is they throw you something that you didn't think of. It's like you had 3 scenarios and it's the 4th scenario that happens and ends up being a big trade. But the more prepared you are, the more you start to be able to stretch your mind to maybe take advantage of that 4th scenario if it plays out. And one of the ways that I open my mind to that is I write down what would be the biggest surprise today. And it might be going up on a weak report and then not being able to hold the rally. Okay, well, that's at least in my brain now. So if that happens, I can consider trading it. And that just to open up to everything that's possible and not to get pigeonholed. It's one of the biggest lessons I've learned about losing money is that it often happens when I make scenarios and then I start to think that because I made a scenario, I must be really creative and that scenario has to play out because I thought of it. So then when it starts to happen, I trade it really aggressively. It's that confirmation bias idea, assuming that since I thought of it, it must be right. And I start almost forcing my will of my scenario onto the market. And then all of a sudden I'm wrong and I realize I've just had a bad day and I wasn't open to the other side of things. So having back to the rules of engagement thing, that kind of for me means, okay, Brad, you're going to be trading on, since you're not trading futures all day anymore, you're going to wait for these events that you can identify that often offer trading opportunities because of the volatility and the extra players that come into the market during an employment or a Fed or whatever. So that's the first thing, is having something like that. And in stocks, it could be earnings reports. It could be, I don't know, many things. Each sector has different stuff. Like in the shipping sector, they've been in a 10-year bear market. And in the year 2020, there's a external pollution standard being imposed on them where they have to have lower sulfur fuel for the environment. So I'm watching that area because that's an event that could shake things up. So that's kind of that's giving me kind of getting my radar lit up to look at that area. I don't know what I will do in there yet, but I know that if something happens, at least I have some context around it. So that might be a little hazy, but I think you get I'm not just swimming around in the ocean blind. I'm trying to pinpoint areas where there might be some action. And then the next thing I do is make the scenarios, which I already mentioned. And to give you a little bit more information on that, when we used to day trade, I sat by Brent. We talked about him in the beginning, another friend of mine who I still talk with all the time. He traded for 15 years with me. And what we would do is we would read the morning news and get an idea of what everyone thought. And we would look at the reports that were coming out and gauge that. We'd make scenarios. In the middle of the day, we would get lunch. We would sometimes take a walk or go work out or something, because it really helps to take a breather in the middle of the day and refocus. We come back in the afternoon and say, okay, let's make scenarios for the afternoon. What could happen if this happens? What about if that happens? Or what about if nothing happens? And we would set that up, and so many times it would keep us out of stupid trades. And having an accountability partner was nice because you would both agree that, well, nothing's happening. We talked about that. Why are you trading this range all day? None of our parameters or our scenarios even set off. So that was a good way to kind of keep in check. And that's pretty much how I would look at the future stuff. In terms of what I do now, it's similar. So now I wake up in the morning and I look at the news wires and I say, okay, was there any stupid news today? So I usually go to a gainers and losers list, and I just look for stuff that's up or down on news that doesn't relate to the stock at all. Not earnings news, because that does relate, but stuff like the CEO was, Bob Kraft was soliciting sex or whatever, all this stuff in the news. McDonald's CEO was doing this or that, or there was a lawsuit against a similar company and everyone's worried that this company's at risk, things like that. And a lot of times I make trades on those based on fading that news a day or two after it happens. So that's one strategy I look at. So I'll make a list of that. So again, you can see that I'm kind of narrowing my field a little bit. And then the next thing I'll do is I'll look out breakout scans to see what new name broke out today. Was there a drug catalyst? Is it an earnings report? Was it something unique, maybe a new product or a new way of communicating, a new satellite, whatever it was? I write that down. Now I have a little list there. And then I have like a market dashboard list I've made, which, not to overwhelm you with information here, but on the market dashboard list, I'm going to go back to futures in a second on that. But on the stock side, I look at the NASDAQ McClellan Summation Index, and I look at the percent of stocks over the 50-day moving average as just general guidelines in terms of, is the market risky here or less risky in terms of initiating new positions? And that's kind of which way is the wind blowing in the water. I might not want to get really long when the market's a little bit shaky in terms of being really overbought or something like that, or accelerating to the downside. So in the futures, one thing I used to do is, a little trick I noticed is I wanted to get better at catching trend days. And I noticed on trend days, up or down in the futures, they often started a similar way. And that was with the advanced decline line. So when the advanced decline line gets to like minus 2,000 to 2,500, that's pretty much like a horrible down day. And it's usually not coming back from that a lot of times. And same thing on the upside. But a lot of times what I noticed, well, to give you some context too, I don't know what the readings are, but I think it's like minus 3,000 and plus 3,000 are the extremes, to give you an idea, or maybe it's 2,500. I can't remember, but the advanced decline line often does things like, say everyone expects a strong retail sales, but you get a weak one and the market just gaps down huge in the morning. And then all of a sudden that advanced decline line opens at minus 1,800. Now it didn't open at minus 2,500. It's like right around that minus 18, minus 1,500. And that thing walks all the way from minus 1,500 to zero, and it finishes the day at plus 1,500. And those are usually the trend days when you start seeing that pattern happen. And because I would often fight the trend days halfway through, or I would think, because you're poisoned by the number being weak, and that's all you can think about. And when it comes back enough, you think you have to sell it. But what's happening is everyone's stuck, and it's the trend the opposite way. So what I would do every morning is when I saw the advanced decline line open that way, I would say, just open your mind for the possibility of a trend day the other way today. Just open your mind to it and watch. And oftentimes that would keep me out of trouble. And then down the road, sometimes I could catch it the proper way. So that was a little bit of my roadmap I would watch. The other thing for futures is when rates are in play, things like the short end euro dollars or the 2-year note and the yield curve, things like that, they don't matter all the time. And then sometimes they matter a lot. Maybe on Fed days, we follow the short end of the curve, but on regular days, we don't care. Potentially, sometimes gold or even oil can be important, but a lot of times it's not. So it's determining when it matters, and it's usually on days with volatility or when interest rates are in play. On a regular day, it really doesn't matter so much. So understanding that, and it's almost like each day, those event days are different than the other days. It's got a different set of rules. The trading rules are the same, your risk management rules are the same, but the way the market acts can be very different. It's kind of like when a stock has earnings, it doesn't act like the day of a regular day, and it's the same thing here. So that's kind of what I would say on my process and the process I used to have when I traded futures. So the second part of this is where do you start? I mean, how do you know what process you should even have if you're lost and you feel like, it's really normal, right, to be, this guy is trading really well and he just waits for little scalp trades all day, or he plays earnings reports and that's what he's good at. And you start jumping from style to style and you're frustrated and you don't know who you are, have no identity, because there's so many things that seem to work and you want to try all of them and maybe be good at all of them, but you just don't know. And this is I guarantee that other people feel this way too. I feel this way right now because I'm moving into stocks more and I've had some success and I've had some failures. And I still don't know exactly how I'm going to end up really solidifying what I do in there. There's some things I like and some I don't. And it's not been a super easy transition in terms of doing the exact same thing. And it's a fun challenge to do, but sometimes I'm scrambling around, even though I've been doing this since I got out of college for my entire adult life. It's not as simple as just flip the switch. It's something new. So the way I'm approaching it is that everything's an experiment and I get information from the experiment. And sometimes I get emotional and I have a bad day and I'm overwhelmed by the rational stance of, hey, this is an experiment and you got some information today. It wasn't information that you liked, but it's what you got. And a lot of times I need a day or two to get that in my system, and then I'm back to the experiment again. And if I manage my risk properly, I start to notice things. It's like that simple list of here's what works and here's what doesn't. And I start to build a list of here's what's working. And then I start to move towards that. And a huge thing when I build that is to say, back to me being curious and liking new products and liking breakouts and correlations that fail. Those are all things that I have traded well in the past. So I know that that's what's going to be part of my system somewhere. I know I'm not just going to be a mean reverting trader. Nothing wrong with that, but that's probably not going to be who I am. I'm open to looking at it, but it's never been who I was since I started doing this. I was never attracted to it. I started trading stocks in the year 2000 in college. And I remember chasing tech stocks and looking at message boards and finding stuff that was hot. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but I remember the excitement of that. And I traded cryptocurrency for a little bit, and I remember that. And it just seems like I'm magnetized to new things like that. So it has to be part of what I do. And so the person who's using quantitative data to analyze things at a level of mean reversion and spreading potentially isn't going to be for me. It doesn't mean it can't be, but it's probably not where I'm going to start. So that eliminates some of that in terms of getting lost. So where do you go from there? I guess the place you go from there is to just continue to understand that being frustrated and trying different things and failing them and jumping around a little bit is okay sometimes. And that's just part of what happens, because you don't really know what you are until you know what you aren't, and you figure it out with pain. And it's not the only way to learn. You can learn through others. You can look at other good traders and say, I noticed that they do these things. I noticed that these traders are cutting their losers and they're adding to their winners, or they're trading smaller when they're struggling. Those are universal principles that I think everybody can benefit from. But in terms of saying you need to trade a breakout because this guy does, or you need to just be buying pullbacks, those things aren't so universal. Those are more specific to you, because a good spot is when it goes your way right away and you can quantify your risk. Doesn't mean that you bought the bottom of a range or a retracement. It could mean that you bought a breakout. So you shouldn't feel like you have to pigeonhole yourself into a specific strategy like that. And no one else can tell you exactly what you're going to be good at. You have to figure that out for yourself. but you can do that through asking questions and studying what's working and what's not, and kind of where you feel excited and where you feel attached to something. And then from there, you start applying like the risk management and different skills, and you start gravitating towards people who trade a similar way, and you can start to build a little bit. So that's what I would say about it. And I'm happy to talk more about that, because I'm struggling with this a little bit right now too, trying to find exactly where I can settle in and have comfort. And I've got a few experiments going on.
No, that's all great. That's an excellent way to put it. And you said something earlier about you can't make someone what they're not when they're trying to learn. You're trying to, I think a lot of people get stuck into that when they start following a mentor or in some education or anything else. They think that I got to do exactly what that person does. And it's just like, you're not going to look exactly like that person, and you're not going to trade exactly like that person. And I know you and I had this discussion about systems. So when I sell my education, I make sure people know it's not a system, because even if I had a system where it worked 90% of the time, first of all, I'm not going to sell that to my mom, let alone anyone. But secondly, you could have a system that someone else's, and you're going to screw it up, or a strategy that's pretty defined, and you're going to try to screw it up, and you're going to screw it up, not intentionally, but you're going to screw it up trying to make it, tweaking it and saying, well, how about this? And people get lost with that. And then they do the jump around, right? But you got to find what fits you, what's comfortable for you. And when you could find what's comfortable for you by knowing when you're not comfortable, you can move, kind of like process of elimination, right? And
Yes,
that's
yes.
important.
When you're not, anyone who's a trend trader who has been stuck in mean reverting trades and then taken a huge loser against the trend knows right away that they're not comfortable with that. And there's others who just sell premium and stay in the ranges, and they manage the breakouts, and they are comfortable with that. So you'll know right away. And two very short stories on that is, I sat next to a trader who was very successful for many years and was the largest trader in the office for a while. And it was, my folks used to say to me, well, why don't you just do what he does? Well, you can't, it doesn't work that
Right.
way, because he's flipping from long to short with his biggest position of the day with something that he sees that I'm not able to get. And I'm just being, when you show up for something and you're really being yourself, and everyone can tell that you're stating your truth and this is who you are, and it just feels good. It feels good to listen to, it feels good to hear. And then when you're being a fraud and you're trying to fit in, or you're trying to be smart when you don't understand something, or just make shit up to look important, it doesn't feel good. And it's the same thing with this. It just, you start feeling better when you lock into that area where it just feels like home a little bit. And that changes over time, and it's never going to be a straight line. There's times too when, and if you have these strategies that do work and you feel good, there's years where it's not good to be following trends. It's choppy, it's downward based. And those are great years to be maybe event traders or people who are selling premium. And you can add those strategies a little bit, but it's to really find something to get going. It's like you focus on one thing and you try to perfect that. And I don't see a way around hopping around in the beginning a little bit. Everybody hops around in the beginning. Because how are you supposed to just dive into the first thing that works? It's like the first girl you date, you just marry. Sometimes it happens, right? But not a lot.
Universal, you use the word universal, and I think that's important. Know what's universal and know what's not. So it's like universal, that's what my education would be about. Like if I had to wrap it, I would say this is like the right kind of universal education you have to know about trading. And then you go from there, whether it's managing your risk, whether it's the identification of what's a good spot. You mentioned this. A good spot isn't being long from a lower price necessarily. It's being long where price reacts your way right away. I'd rather be long from 99 even and have it go my way 2 points right away than be long from 92 even and have it dick around there for 10 minutes and then go up. I want to be satisfied. So now I'm trading from the upside, and where I could be more objective, make a mistake and still make money, than have a trade just go against me right away. Yeah, but it's a lower price. It's better to be long lower. No, it's better to have good spots that react and do what they're supposed to do. Because if you think about it, who would in their right mind buy something and say, it's going to probably go down after I buy it, but at least I'm in it. Nobody would expect that to want to happen. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to buy it at 98. It might go down to 92 even, but I'm okay with it. Well, then that's probably not a good spot. You could probably refine your technique in getting a better spot. If every one of your trades have to go against you first, there's a better way to trade, right? There's a better way to pick spots if you have to expect every one of your trades to go against you.
Right.
So universal is important. I don't think most people know what's universal. And then when they do, and when they get that, you got to apply everything that's universal to the strategy that you're most comfortable with and the speed in which you want to take on trades. The market that you want to trade that's more applicable to your style, to your personality, to your risk tolerance might be crude oil, might be the S&Ps or the NASDAQ. You know, if you like breakouts, the NASDAQ's a better market than the S&Ps for the most part, right? Or crude oil even. Trade a breakout market. Trading is trading. So I think that's really important, is to be universal. And also, what you do to prepare is good from the universal standpoint, but then you're going to go off doing different things you're comfortable with that aren't going to work for other people. But the baseline stuff will, right? How often did you get to work and just start trading? It was harder when you did that, right? If you had no idea what was coming out that day, right? No
Oh yeah.
information about what was driving the market. Did you
It
do that
might
a
have
lot?
been, I mean, you always have those days, but it might have been, maybe it doesn't make a lot of difference, but the reason it makes a lot of difference is because you don't feel comfortable. And that's the whole point, is like when you don't feel like you're in control because you didn't follow your routine. And it's like you go play a basketball game and you didn't warm up, and usually you do. You just feel like, maybe I'm going to pull something today. Maybe not, but sure doesn't feel good when you're in that position. And if so, this kind of gets me into a whole nother issue, which I think is probably equally, if not more important, which is, and I'm working with a therapist and a coach right now on this, which I hired just like a month ago or so, and I've never done this before. But what I've noticed is there's certain patterns that we all have from childhood or from whatever, many different things. We get irritated, we get angry, we get impulsive, all these things. And when you start figuring out your system and your process, then there's the whole nother battle where what happens when you just don't do what you're good at? You just do stupid shit that makes no sense because you have an emotionally off day where you didn't sleep well, you have a personal distraction. And what they're having me do is aggressively journal 3 times a day about how am I feeling right now. And I have this list of, this might sound crazy, but I have a list of these faces, these cartoon faces. I got like 50 of them here at my desk. And I got to look at these faces and I say, well, I'm paranoid or I'm frustrated. Why am I frustrated? Because my account has opened down the last 3 days and it's irritating to me and it's making me lose confidence in what I'm doing. And it's making me wonder if this strategy is going to work for me. Okay, so I know that. But what's happened to me is I noticed that when I start coming in down and I'm frustrated, my reaction, and I did not know this until the therapist pointed out to me, is I need to have a flurry of activity to blunt that. So what I do is I put on a bunch of trades. My activity goes up about 4-fold when I'm frustrated. It's the same reason that you go and have a coffee or have those cookies or have a bunch of drinks at the party when you don't know anybody, because you're hiding, there's an emotion that you're not acknowledging and you're using something else to kind of cover it up and get you through. And it's really sneaky. But in trading, you might all of a sudden want to put on a bunch of trades, or you might get scared and not want to put on any trades. But I put on a bunch of trades. And what happens eventually is one of those trades is a really bad one and I get crushed. And then 3 days later, it shows up. And then I start saying, geez, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not following my stops. What the hell?
Snowball.
It snowballs. And I'm not, if you're not figuring out your patterns, you don't even know why that happened. You start looking at the wrong reasons. So that's the next level here, is to really know your personal disaster plan and start. That's why you're journaling your emotions, because you can start to see when you feel this way, you often do these things. You got to stop it, because if you don't stop it, you're going to have meltdowns. And it seems stupid and fluffy. Oh, it's more important that I know how to trade. No, actually it's not. This is way more important, because once you get this figured out, then you're very rational. And when you don't have it figured out, you're more of a human in terms of making emotional decisions. And then who cares what your plan is if you're just going to blow up and do something else when you don't feel well, when you don't feel right. And you might feel right for 3 months in a row and you don't feel right for a week, and that whole week can erase the entire 3 months. I've done it time and time again. So that's just something I wanted to put out there.
ABC. I don't claim to know as much as who you're seeing, but I would call it like ABC. When A happens, B is going to happen. And when B happens, C is going to happen. And you don't want to get to D, because D is throwing your monitors out the window and breaking mice and tearing up keyboards,
And the
right?
thing
So
that,
can I stop it at
yes,
B?
you have to. If you don't, that's what I'm learning is if you don't stop it at A or B, when it gets to C or B and a half, B between B and C, you just have to play out the pattern and blow up. You're just gonna blow up. It doesn't, it's that amygdala, that thing in your brain that just, you can't stop it once it fires. But what you can do is you can say, when I start beating myself up, when I start getting kind of gruff and irritated or angry or really self-conscious, whatever, then A and B are starting to happen. And that's when you need to write it down, go for a walk, and get the hell out of there. Because once it starts, then you
It's a point of no return.
you can't go back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting, where you actually, you actually, it's like a magnet. You're going to force it to happen. So you could say, see,
You're
I
going to do
told you
it.
so.
What happens when you get a loss limit on a bad day? You go right to it, right? Why
Go
is that?
right to it. Yeah.
Yeah, right to it. And what happens when you're down a lot and you get back to even almost? You finish back down at the lows oftentimes. You notice that? Off the deck and then back down to the lows. I just want to make some money today, back down to the lows. It happens a lot too.
There was someone that said something more physical than that, is if you're skidding and there's a tree and you're like, don't hit the tree, don't hit the tree, don't hit the tree, you hit the tree. You know what I mean? You're
Mhm.
gonna do what you're focused on, right? You're gonna end up fulfilling with a high probability what you're focused on. Your thoughts, if you're having internal, you got to know what your internal thoughts are, because they matter. You got to get them out there. You got to identify them, because they matter
That's
more than
the
anything else.
right. Either you're telling somebody or you're journaling them. And it's not about journaling and it's not about like, oh, I need to go back and read my journal every week. You can, but it's not even about that. You could throw it away every day. It's just about getting it out. And then the next level is identifying, okay, what, how do I stop the bad stuff? And what happens when I'm doing well? What state am I in? And I used to do this and I got away from it. And I'm back at it again. If it gives you an idea how important it is. And this time I'm paying someone to help me stay at it, because this is the game now, is getting that down. Because
It's
without
unintentionally, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you're
that, no,
unintentionally advertising this verbal journal that I created. And I told you about it about 6 months ago, and you loved the idea. Unfortunately, it's only on a couple platforms, but some of the people in here have it and use it. And the idea I told you, where you could click on your chart and a dialog box comes up and you say what you say, and then you close it and it leaves colored dots back. And to your point, you don't even have to go back and listen to it necessarily, but you're forcing yourself to get it out. Title it,
right.
get it out, and then you could see how it's helping you. But it's important to get it out. And that's the way to journal, because people, writing it down is important, but it's hard to stick to that. It's like going and exercising for 90 minutes a day. Will you get healthy? Yes. Can you continue that schedule? Well, probably not. But if you could just get in the habit of doing something for 20 or 30 minutes a day and breaking a sweat, you're going to get, over time, get healthy or stay healthy. Do things that are practical, right? You don't have to drive an hour to some gym and work out for 90 minutes and pack a bag and shower and do all these things that, if one thing in that chain breaks, you won't do it. Make it easy. Make something easy to do, and you'll have a better chance at doing it and making it a habit. But if you make something hard
Mm-hmm.
to do, you'll start it, but you won't continue it. And that's where people get lost in staying healthy, either in their physical life or in their trading life. Be practical. It's just not, it's practical means easy, or it means just you'll do it. Set yourself up to make it a habit. And most people, they go the complexity route. One thing I have written down is, I don't want to be an expert in anything but simple. Man, if I could find the simplicity in whatever I'm looking to do, then I found the right stuff, right? Because it ain't simple to most of the rest of the people.
Well, and that's the thing too. I'm realizing is I listen to a lot of podcasts. I read a lot of books, and that seems like it's a good thing. Well, yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing, but sometimes I get my brain full of so much stuff. Does that really matter that much? What matters a lot more is I really know myself, and I know that this is where I'm comfortable, this is where I'm strong, and I keep just working on that and getting as good as I can where I'm strong, and understanding where I could fall. So much more important than reading books. Even I'm not saying you shouldn't read books, but given the choice, we probably all read and go external more than we go internal, which is a mistake. Everyone wants to pay and everyone wants a system and to follow trade ideas, but what you really want is to feel like you can do it yourself. And the way to do that is to get locked into that magic that you have that no one else had. No one else is going to express the same traits that you're going to express. And once you lock into that in the market, then you can start having success, and it feels really good because it's your success. It's not some, you can absolutely look at someone else and say, I really like this system. This person's really good at it. And I think I can take a few things, maybe half of it or more of it, and use it for myself. And maybe you're comfortable with some things and not others. That's totally fine. You can make somebody else's stuff your own. You could totally say, I love how this guy manages risk, and I love how he sizes up for his trades, or how she goes in and reads all the 10Ks, earnings reports, gets really down and dirty with the data. I can jive with that. That's fine. But again, there has to be something that it's unlikely that someone else is going to hand you the keys to your own stuff, your own style. Every athlete's different. Every person's different. Every trader's different. I just keep hammering on this because I think it's so important.
Well, here you talk about they have daily conversations with Brent because you worked with him, you know him, he knows you, and those conversations, and with other guys too that you might talk to from time to time. Those are the best authors to read from, because you buy a book, the author doesn't know you. He's generalizing what's worked here or worked there, but not specific to you. But your friends that you put around you do, and vice versa. So I think the most important thing that this education I put out there has is the other room where people are like they're working next to each other. They get to know each other. They've met each other outside of that particular virtual office. So they developed a relationship that you and Brent have, because that's the best book you could ever buy, is having relationships with guys you know that know you, that are
Right.
on the same page with trying to do this. You're not going to trade exactly the same.
And
But
it's important that you get on the page with someone in a similar development. You might think it's better. Someone who's a little bit more experienced with you can be good, but someone who's way more experienced than you is a bad fit too. It's like having someone who's in the bottom of the company work with the CEO. It helps to have people in your general sphere of influence, or sphere of like similar peers, I guess. And then you're working with them to improve, and you're using that system versus having someone who's been doing it forever and you haven't. You can get things from them, but sometimes it's better to work your way through the progression.
that's what that room is it's where you had to go through education first to get there, right? So you're not just brand new. You've had to go through some higher level of education through this program, and then you go into it. And just like a new office, you don't just go in there and start yapping and talking. You just feel your way through it. But you're exactly right. You can't just show up, never have traded before, and come into some environment and think you're going to be either the leader or going to pick up a lot. Just like in our office, they didn't put the newer guys with the older guys, if you noticed, right?
Right.
He created that whole new room back there.
You can seek out
Well,
those guys on your own, and because you'll know you listen to different, like you can listen to me talk, listen to you talk, read books, talk to other traders, and you start to say, oh, I kind of have a similar mind to this person. I'm going to learn more from them. Or, yeah, it was great listening, but that's not really for me. That's okay. And then you find the person or the people who can help you on your journey. You take what you can, you move on.
that's what this team room is about. You'll gravitate to those that you're going to fit. And I just continue to underscore the point where you don't have to spend hours and hours and hours reviewing what you did, but you got to go back and review at some point with someone else that allows you to, almost like it's an exercise. People prepare, but they got to review. And again, nobody wants to review a shitty day. I get that. And nobody wants to spend 2 hours reviewing after a long day of trading. But you don't have to. But you do have to go back. And that's where a thing like a verbal journal, which is practical, makes sense to say, well, where did I have some angry thoughts? Where did I have some good thoughts? Or get on with someone in a phone call. Or, what's cool about this team room is you can go to a private room and just have a one-on-one, one-on-two discussion and say, we used to do it. I don't think you were part of it. I think it was before you. We used to have equity roundtables. The guys who traded equity futures would all go in the back room, and we go around the table back when, you remember when you could print out your trades and they would create statistics of you dump your TT trades onto an Excel spreadsheet and then print them. Remember
Mm-hmm.
doing that?
Yes.
And so we'd have that pile of all our trades with our stats. We'd all sit around the table, and I created the idea of, after 5 minutes, let's move on, because I don't want to hear a guy ramble on. So we would do that. Dave was part of it because he was trading Euro stocks and DAX. And so we would go around the table, and the only thing we would talk about are the runs. You have 3-4 winners in a row, talk about that. You have 3-4 losers in a row, talk about that. Next. And I tell this story all the time. The guy I learned a lot from, maybe the most from, was the guy. There was 2 Pauls. I don't want to get confused, but the one Paul, and you probably remember him. He might have been gone by the time you started, but he wasn't a good trader. But what I learned from him was, you wouldn't have known it by talking. He'd be the only guy with a red day. We'd all be up 3, 4, 500 ticks. He'd be down 100 ticks. The only guy. But you think he was the only guy up because he justified what he did over and over and over again. Every day he'd be the outlier. And I learned how powerful the mind is. It'll find a way to make you feel good no matter what. You got to catch that. You can't be that stubborn. You got to know you're doing that. It's the ABC stuff that you're talking about. You got to catch it. And as much as we yell at him in the meetings, you know what I mean? And it wouldn't click. And he was a guy that never was going to settle in to be a good trader. You know how he used to get out of losers? He'd spread them. He'd put on a trade for as an outright position, and it might be like sell 4 Euro stocks when the Euro stocks are a lot thinner, and he'd be wrong, and the market would rally. So instead of just covering the Euro stock outright, he'd buy a couple DAX. So now he's got a loser and 2 outrights because he couldn't admit he was wrong. But it's that we weren't just guys. We were guys with similar experience, trading a similar market, and then you could gravitate to a guy or group that traded more like you and bang it out. And it's good to be criticized. One thing I say that I think's resonated with people is this. You want someone to tell you you suck, not because they hate you or because they're jealous, but because they want you to get better. Those are good friends that don't embarrass you. Those are good spouses. They don't do it to embarrass you, and they don't do it because they hate you. They say you suck because they want you genuinely to get better. Those are good friends. Those are good spouses. And you need to find people like that in this business, personally, but professionally too. You need people that'll lay it on the line, but you're not offended when they criticize you. And most people don't have that. And when their wife or husband says it to them, they get offended because they're saying it from a bad place. You know what I mean? They're saying it because they don't like the other person. Well, then it doesn't work. But when when you get good criticism from your wife and you're not offended by it, that's the most helpful, right, critique you could ever get. And you got to do something with it. So those were real good. Hey, there's a couple questions. Let me ask you them, and then you can answer them.
I got them up here too. I got them.
I'll read them so everybody else can hear them. So have you ever had a problem with hesitation to enter at the best trade location because you're seeking too much confirmation? And how do you handle it?
Yes, I do have that problem. My problem, though, tends to be the other problem, which is I dive in too soon before I know what I'm doing, and I'm impulsive, and then I realize I'm out, I'm in. Why did I get in this? I traded it too big. So but when I'm on the side that you're asking the question about, that usually comes after I've been struggling and I'm trying something different, and I'm starting to doubt myself a little bit, and it's almost like I don't even know if I should try this. And at those times, it helps for me to say, okay, well, you risked way more on stuff that was a lot stupider than this. So what you need to do is just take the risk with a size that you can accept, put your stop in, and be okay with the experiment. Just do it. Collect the data, write it down, study it, and then assess why it did or didn't work, and just run the experiment and do that a few times and just contain the risk. And you can look back at it, and that's a professional way to do it, where you can, because if you don't do it, the worst feeling is when you don't act on your stuff and you're just paralyzed. So if you can't do it with certain size, then cut the size in half and do it with the size that you can, and put the proper risk in. And I've had to force myself on some new strategies to do that sometime, because I thought, well, the size I normally trade, I don't, well, then do it at a smaller one, because you're missing out on the opportunity to learn something because of maybe past losses or uncertainty that may or may not be justified. So That's how I would look at that.
It's a professional way to do it, is what you just said. That was real powerful. It's a professional way to do it, to do that exercise. That was well said. The way you wrapped it up into that, because you're not just shooting darts, you're actually taking a professional approach on how to accurately kind of discover this data. But you got to have the data in order to analyze it. You got to get it out there. Cut
Yep.
your size to increase your comfort.
The other thing I wanted to add that you mentioned is you said you don't have to review for 2 hours after a bad day. One thing I would say about that is I've always found that it's so painful to review after a bad day. It's not that it's painful. It's more just like this heavy, gunky, I don't want to look at this shit. I can't stand this right now. You just have no interest in doing it. You just want to walk away. And then if you look at that 2 weeks later, you might get really curious about it, but then you realize, oh shit, I don't have the data because I didn't want to do it that day. So at least make yourself a promise that on a bad day, at least get the data, collect the data, and just throw it somewhere in your journal or in your folder, so you have it for later to go back. You don't have to do it that day, but just keep it for later, because you will enjoy looking at when you break down, when you feel better.
And when it's done, you still have it accurate by keeping
Yes.
accurate notes.
Don't lose the lesson, but you don't have to guilt yourself into doing it that day.
Right. And you certainly don't have to do it for hours. And make it easy on yourself. It's like, it reminds me, the dentist I have, he says, should I floss and do this? And he goes, listen, should you floss every day? Would it be better? Yeah, but that's not practical. Here, get this device and do it once in a while. Use a toothpick once in a while. You're
Right.
brushing your teeth. He says, just do a little bit of good stuff and don't try to do everything that's perfect, because you're not going to continue to do it. You're going to stop doing it after a week. So just do things you could do, and every little bit helps. You're going to go on a diet and eat everything that's perfect. Is that practical? No. But if you're eating better and better, you'll see. You'll know when you're not eating well and when you are. But you don't have to be extreme in anything we're talking about. But you have to put stuff on. If if hesitation is a problem, then if you can cut your size, would be advice number one. Then cut your size, right? You're uncomfortable because the risk is too high and you can't stomach the losers when you're wrong. So that's an easy it's not an easy answer, but it's the right answer. Like, well, cut your size, cut it way down to 1 if you have to. But if you're already trading 1-lots and 1-lots are your biggest size, well, then you got to look at yourself and say, well, what else is keeping me from not putting this on? There's a barrier. It's confidence. It's something, right? It's fear.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to get rid of fear. You got to replace it with something. That's my thought, is that fear doesn't just go away. You got to replace it. You know what I mean? Fat doesn't go away. You replace it. Or you know what I mean? If you're afraid that someone's going to beat you up, you don't one day all of a sudden come into school and say, I'm not afraid anymore. But if all of a sudden you worked out, you learned a little self-defense, now you became confident.
Another good way to look at it is ask yourself why 5 different times. So I'm scared to put this trade on. Why? Because I don't want to lose money. Why? Because I've been struggling lately. Why? Because I'm doing other people's ideas. Why? Because I feel like I don't have my own idea. And then you get to you get down to exactly what it is to work on, not just some bullshit that you think it helps you flush it out better. So I use that exercise. That might be helpful.
I like that. Ask why 5 yeah, right. It's like when kids ask you why.
Be like a kid.
Trying to understand it. They're not trying to be a pain.
Right.
That's an excellent.
No one else can help you with all this stuff. That's not true. Of course you can get help. What I'm saying is no one else is going to do all that for you. You can ask the questions but no one else is going to come up to you and say, hey, let's ask why 5 times, or it's just kind of something you have to be curious about. And it's the opposite of what is usually out there. Usually it's like another book or another indicator or another, strategy that someone uses to make a bunch of money, which may work and may not work for them. Doesn't really even matter, actually. Who cares? James Harden does these step back 3-pointers and like nobody else can do. Does that mean you can do it? Maybe, maybe not. But that doesn't mean you should model your game that way. But I know LeBron James also does those now. So he models his game a little bit off of that tactic, but that's not his main game. That's just a part of what he added. But no one can just study LeBron James and be like him, because he has a huge body and he can pass well and he has all these skills that others don't have. So it's the same thing with trading. It's like, you can look at all these different best practices, but where's yours?
They're not going to go. What you just said was great. Nobody is going to do it for you. You can get help, but they're not going to tie your shoes. They're not going to say, "You want me to help you dress nice? Fine. But does that mean I got to come over and dress you?" No, I'll tell you some nice shirts and pants to buy and put together. And I'm not saying I tell you that, but that's the whole point. No one's going to dress you. They give you some ideas of what to wear, but no one's going to put your socks on for you. You got to know how to do some of these things yourself. Someone texted me. I don't think they could type it in, but he texted me a question. Is there any other exercises this therapist has given you that you found helpful?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for, that's a good, I enjoy talking about this. I should talk about this more in the podcast. Um, so I've done 2 sessions and it's a 6-month plan. So the first one is they told me to have what's called a feeling bucket. So every day I write down positive, neutral, and negative, and I note 3 times. So I set my Apple Watch for the breathe notification 3 times, and I don't do the breathing, but what I do whenever I get that notification, 3 times a day, I write down, I check in, and it might have multiple feelings. I might have a negative and a positive. So I'll write down, I write the date, but not the time. And I put like 1 or 2. So it's the first comment of the day or the second. So I'll say like for instance, this morning, right when I woke up, I feel like I'm a little bit inept right now. I just feel a lack of focus because my P&L was down today. I also feel like I haven't necessarily proven myself with this new strategy I'm working on in the stock market yet. So I feel a little bit, and then the other side of me at the same time feels content that I'm working through some of my issues on the therapy. I'm feeling content that I'm trying some new things that could be profitable for me, and that I'm open to enjoying this journey and not judging myself as much as I may have in the past. So it's almost like I'm feeling a little bit vulnerable here, but there's 2 sides to it, and I wrote them both down. And that's basically, I'm getting it out there. And then when you go back, it's an amazing thing for later. And when I talk to her, we kind of go over these things, and then they have amazing insights into stuff that your tone of voice, your emotion, how fast you're talking, and they point out things that you don't notice, which seems crazy, but there's stuff that comes out that you think, whoa, I had no idea that I was doing that. And
Do you
they get,
record? I'm sorry. Keep going.
yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, I do record them.
You record. You don't write them. You record them.
I record the sessions with the therapist, and then I'm going to go back and listen to them later, because I find after doing this for all these years, I'm dialing in, and this is probably the most important possible thing I can do for my life and my trading.
Do you record your thoughts though, or do you write those down? You record them by writing.
I write them down. I'm physically writing them down. So I'm going to give you a couple other tactics that I've gotten so far. So I told you about writing your stuff down. The other one is have an idea dump for your brain, or a task dump. So just have a list where every time you have an idea, a trade idea, you write it down. Just get it off your brain. You're frustrated, get it off your brain. You have a new system or website you want to check out, just dump it. So I have all that in the list, and later I'll go back to that list and decide if any of them are actionable, or if it's just stuff that I thought I needed to do at the time and I realized that I don't really need to do anymore. So that's helped me kind of free my brain up. If you have a really active mind, it's just a way of deloading the brain a little bit.
Prioritizing. That seems like it
Yeah.
would be a great way to prioritize, and then you get distracted because you had an idea and you really weren't that interested. So you go back and create like a checklist, right?
Yes. Well, no. It's more of it's less, okay. So the checklist gives me a ton of anxiety, because the checklist makes me feel like I have all these things I have to do. And if I don't do them, it's not the checklist's fault. It's my fault. I give myself anxiety about feeling like in order to have a successful day, I have to figure out how to get everything done on my list. So with this idea dump, the idea is almost the opposite. It's throw down everything just in a line, like on a dot, 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 or dash or whatever. And it's not a checklist. It's everything that you think would be on a checklist. And then maybe a day later or whenever, when you calm down, you look back and say, oh, well, half of this is not even important anymore. But these 2 things I actually am interested in. And then you go ahead and do
So
them.
it's like and that's what I was kind of going to. It's like a checklist that you don't necessarily have to check off. Meaning you don't have to do all these
No,
things.
you don't have to do it. Yeah,
You
you
have to
just dump it.
decide whether you don't want to do it.
It's a brain. Yeah, it's just an exercise to free your mind up from like endless thinking you have to do stuff, which is a huge problem for me. Having an active mind and always trying to grow and improve, I can go a little nuts. And Brent, who I work with, is the opposite. He's a lot more, I would say, grounded that way than I am. So we work well together because I'm getting a lot of ideas and coming up with a lot of stuff, and he's very good at staying focused and staying. Everyone has the strengths and weaknesses, and
Yes.
and so he has his own perspective on it. And there's a lot of things we line up on all the big stuff, but there's different. We all have a different personality with how we struggle with life and trading and everything else.
Let's do one more question, and then because we got 3 minutes, and then he's got to run, and then maybe come back in the future.
Yeah, I
If you
will.
don't mind, because then we could look at some of your charts that we didn't have time for, and there'll be more questions if people have heard from you again and again. And this is great stuff. I always think of it when I have a guest on. I always think of how did I like it, and if I liked it, I'll be selfish and say everybody liked it, and that's usually true. But it's like I have a tough time paying attention, right?
Right.
I think you're a lot like that, right? I don't say I got ADD, but it's like I've got a
Oh,
fast mind.
yeah. It's like everyone has that.
I'm
It's like,
thinking of a lot of ideas. Exactly. I could
right.
do this. I could do that. And so it's like if I could pay attention, then I think anybody could. And I think that's what's important. Let me ask one more question. And if you don't get your question answered, we'll cover it. How do you overcome the frustration with feeling like your stop losses always get hit? Then when they do hit your stop loss, the trade turns and goes the other way.
Yeah, it's so easy for me to sit here and tell you what to do, and so hard when you're emotionally activated in the moment. But what I would say is just like the bad day stuff that we talked about keeping those records, if you can maybe just focus on that, and if you just had the screenshots and those entries and exits, and you built up 10 or 20 of those over time, I bet you can start to figure out a pattern. Maybe you're buying the puke, or you're buying the back into the range move, or you're stopping out of half and buying half back, and then seeing how that next half of it goes after that. The different strategies you can use. Maybe you only enter after it pukes down. And a lot of times you really want to get in, and then it flushes you. And when your confidence is low, you have to get out. Or if you're trading a little bit bigger, you have to get out. And it's kind of gaming yourself there and figuring out, okay, what's the next order, the second or third order of this problem I'm facing? And I have 10 of them to look at here. So now I can kind of figure out, why is it? Like, is it just a stupid trade today? Or is it more of I'm rationally doing this, but I keep having the same problem? Okay, maybe they look the same. Can I group them into like 2 buckets of how they go wrong? Do they ever go right? And then you start to solve it. That's what I would say.
Got to collect the data. And if it's happening all the time, then think about getting in where you were going to get stopped out. Know where your stop is and say, I'm not going to play this one. I'm going to get in where I would have got stopped out. But you have to have the data to know that's happened to you too much. You're getting
Yep.
out. You're getting stopped out where you should be getting in.
The challenge is too, it's such an emotional thing, the job is, and then you've had it for a while and you stop collecting and you're just sick of it, and then you get excited and you're back again, and you just kind of miss the lesson. And I do it all the time. Don't feel bad. There's always another lesson coming. That's the thing. But I'm going through the same thing with that. So that's pretty normal.
You got to keep accurate stats, which your statement keeps. But then when you miss trades and don't do stuff, those numbers aren't, you're not able to analyze those numbers because you never created them. And that's where something writing it down or verbalizing it keeps emotional statistics. That's what I would call them. Do you have emotional statistics? Not just how you feel 1 to 10 all the time, just how you feel. Just get it out there. It's so healthy to say it, but not just say it out loud. That's one thing, and then it just goes out there. When you know you recorded something, there's
There's a
another dimension to that. You know, it's like you're
On that
saying it
note,
to someone.
sorry to interrupt you.
It's a
On that note, there's a Jim Collins podcast on the Tim Ferriss podcast recently, and it's really good. And he talks about how he charts his emotions, and he labels each day as a +1, +2, +1, 0, -1, or -2. And he does it in a spreadsheet, and he sorts them over the years and figures out what do the +2 days have in common. I've tried the spreadsheet. It doesn't work for me because I just end up not, I like the handwritten journal better, which is harder to sort, but it's the same idea that I'm noticing these really successful people, really high level people are doing the work that other people think is not necessary or is touchy feely or isn't. That's the work they're doing. So that's probably the work we should be doing.
How do you spell your last name? J
Jelinek.
E K. I'm going to put it out there so they could search for your podcasts Is there anything else they could search? If they search your name slash podcast, it'll come up. One of the many ways they could listen to it. Or is there any specific link you would tell them to
Yeah,
go to?
you can Google Trading Life Podcast by Brad Jelinek, and I got it on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple. There's a web,
That's it.
trading,
Trading life.
yeah,
That's right.
tradinglifepodcast.com. It has it also. So it's all over now. You can search my full name too. And it'll be on there. Yeah.
I'd like you to come back as you know, like not, I don't want, you have to come back too much, but like a certain pace, like
Yeah.
once a month,
Sure.
once every
Yeah.
other month,
Yeah. I can
because
come back. I like talking.
uh,
I've really enjoyed this. Is therapy for me too. And everybody, thank you for the questions. And I'm happy to do it because it just feels good to connect with other traders and to just get it out a little bit. It's just part of my therapy is getting it out. Hey, I'm struggling right now with some stuff. It's okay. I've been here before.
yeah. And what people don't get is like when people say, well, why don't you just trade? Just trade. I've been doing this for 18 years, but for 10 solid years. And it's like, there's other things I wanted to do. You can't, would you agree with this? You can't just keep the pedal pressed. Not necessarily an age thing. It's a timing thing where trading it takes a lot. So you can't just trade like we used to trade indefinitely. Right.
Oh yeah, that's you are always changing. I don't trade the way I used to. There's aspects of it I do, and there's days where it's back to the old days. But you're always evolving, and markets are changing. You have to keep moving.
Got to keep moving. It can't, you can't just throw it in a neutral and say that, yeah, I've had a lot of fun trading, and then I've had a lot of fun educating, a lot of fun doing these things. There'd be a big thing missing in my life had I not started this educational program. And that's probably why I kind of and I backed into doing it. But the only thing that bothers me with this education is that every business has a black eye, but trading education, there's just a lot of knuckleheads out there that do it. But I mean, it is what it is. There's a lot of bad people who sell insurance and sell uh, shoes and everything else. But you kind of get lumped into that, and it doesn't bother me. It just I dismiss those people. But there are a lot of knuckleheads that they try
People
to
can
teach
tell
people
though.
something they don't know.
They can tell. You just know when someone's speaking from a point of truth versus they're having another angle. You can just tell. I mean, pretty. It's okay to. There's nothing wrong with selling something good that helps people. I subscribe to so many things, newsletters and groups. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good. It doesn't mean everyone's. That's. I mean, I'm paying for therapy. I'm in a group with earnings winners. There's a lot of stuff that, and even if I don't use it, I know one more thing that I'm not, right? That's a good investment.
Right.
Can I answer one question before I go here real quick?
Absolutely.
Christine was talking about how do you keep from writing your losing trades out of your trading plan? And I take it the question means like, do you just kind of want to not put that down or ignore the losing ones and focus on the good ones? It's funny how your ego or whatever we want to call this, or your anxiety wants to just eventually, you're a good soldier for the first few days, and then all of a sudden you start just omitting the stuff that just kind of numbs out, and you omit those losing trades or those lessons. And I guess the way I would answer that before would be, I don't really know, but now I feel like I do know the answer to that. And I'm so determined after all these years of doing it that this is the important work that I have to do. And it keeps biting me in the butt until I figure it out. So now it's almost like I really just relish copying down the bad stuff, because the bad stuff is where I'm going to learn. I mean, I'm going to learn from the good stuff too. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to mimic my good trades. I'm not talking about focusing on the negative here. That's different than understanding the patterns that are causing me trouble. So there's one thing that the therapist has pointed out to me, and I also had my former mentor, Dave Ellis, who owned the firm I was at, pointed out to me, was that I tend to be so optimistic that I'm going over the negativity that's in my mind and painting an optimistic story over it. And what happens is I'm actually repressing it and not letting it out, covering it up. And then I'm acting it out with a flurry of bad trades. So you want to pretend like you're positive, or do you actually want to be more neutral and find out what you're doing wrong? You can put on a fake, pretend everything's okay inside, and then act it out on the market and lose money. But that's no way forward. And that's what I was doing sometimes.
Dave told you that?
He alluded to that a lot. And I've found that to be true through the therapy, where she said, well, do you notice that You keep moving to the optimistic thing and kind of justifying why the bad thing might happen, or you're justifying, well, you're really frustrated, but hey, it's great. You have freedom. You're trading for a living. You're doing what you always wanted to do. And you are working on these new strategies. Everything in your life is great. And she's like, do you notice that your frustration is always justified by all these good things? Yeah, your life's really good, but you're not really giving voice to the frustration. And so what you do is you quietly go and put on a bunch of trades. And it happens over and over. It's a subtle thing. It's a sneaky thing. It's why you're eating those cookies or drinking all that coffee or drinking the drink or having all the alcohol or eating like the hummus and chips over and over again for no reason at a party. It's all about like something else under it. Some of it doesn't matter, but this is the same thing.
The hummus chips at the party. I like that. I'm not going to eat any more hummus chips
Yeah, no more of that.
after that. But you're right. You don't address what really is the underlying problem. And it helps when someone tells you that. Man, it really does. That's why this is great to hear from you. And it's probably great to hear from someone else. I remember someone, and then we really got to go. But I remember this guy, he was a baseball announcer. And he was, he says, my life is great. Everything is fine. But I backed into talking to this therapist, and he said, I'd recommend if people could afford it, or people, even if they couldn't, to always find someone to talk to, whether you think everything is great, because nobody's perfect. He says it's like lifting weights. It's exercise for the mind. It doesn't mean that, man, it's really cool that not only you're seeing someone, but you're confident to tell everybody. You want to get better. There's nothing problem with your life. You just want to get better with your life. That's what's
honestly
awesome.
Like relationship therapy, trading therapy, life coaching, life therapy, personal trainer for all exercise, all that stuff just makes you stronger. It makes you better. If you're good, you get to be great. If you're bad, you can get to be good. And there's just it's always a good thing if you can do it. There's no reason not to
that's
do
like
it.
Navy SEAL training, is that they know they could push. You don't have no idea how far your body could go, because nobody ever even tries to push it that far most times in one's life. But thanks again, Brad. This was awesome. You could see the reaction in the
Thank
chat
you.
box. So let's schedule another one in a few weeks and do it again.
Okay, great. Do you mind send me the video or the audio too? I'll post it on my podcast channel.
Yeah, as soon as it renders, I'll send it. It'll just have this image of your chart up, of the audio.
Perfect.
And you'll have it. But thanks again, and we'll talk to you in a few.
Thank you. See ya. Bye.
All right, guys. I'll have this rendered and put up in the site in a few hours.